I returned to the house I once called home, knowing something inside it had been waiting for me far too long. Every step felt like walking through the echoes of a childhood, carved by silence and sharp comparisons. I had spent years believing I was the broken one, the shadow standing behind a perfect sister everyone adored without question. But the moment I opened that old wooden box, I sensed the truth was about to rewrite everything I thought I knew. Madeline was always the child everyone looked at first, as if the sun itself followed her every move. I learned early that my name rarely crossed anyone's mind, unless something needed to be cleaned or fixed. Our living room walls were covered with her certificates, each frame shining like proof that she was chosen. My achievements, though small, were quietly pushed into drawers no one ever opened again. Dad used to say talent was natural, and Madeline was born with it while I was born with chores. I remember standing in the hallway, hearing them praise her laugh, her grades, her effortless charm. I also remember thinking maybe love was something you had to earn, and I was always one step behind. Mom tried sometimes to bring me into the conversations, but Dad brushed it off like it was unnecessary. He said I didn't like attention anyway, though he never asked if that was true. Madeline absorbed affection the way flowers absorbed sunlight, and no one noticed how cold the shade felt. At school events, they rushed to the front row to record her, leaving me searching for a familiar face. I often pretended I didn't mind. Pretending was easier than feeling the sting of being half seen. When she won awards, we ate at fancy restaurants, and Dad toasted to her bright future. When I did something good, dinner stayed the same, quiet and ordinary, like nothing had changed at all. Madeline never acted cruel intentionally, but her kindness felt like charity handed down to someone undeserving. She shared stories of triumph at the table while I washed dishes, listening from the sink. Sometimes she would smile at me like she pitied how little space I took in the world. Even birthdays felt uneven, mine simple and short, while hers filled the house with music and proud laughter. I learned to keep my voice low, my hopes smaller, my expectations buried deep where no one could mock them. Every compliment given to her echoed louder in my head as another reminder of what I was not. Dad called her his star, the promise of the family, the one destined to carry our name forward. He never said what I was destined for, but his silence filled in the answer well enough. I tried to shine in my own way once, joining a school competition with everything I had. When I showed them my certificate, Dad asked if I had finished sweeping the garage. The certificate stayed on the counter for a week before disappearing without a word. Madeline told me not to take it personally, that some people were meant to support others. I didn't know then that she believed I was one of those people, built for the background. In family photos, she always stood in the center, and I learned to drift toward the edges. The older we grew, the more the roles solidified, like we were characters in a script already written. She became the example of excellence, and I became the reminder that excellence wasn't guaranteed. When guests visited, Dad introduced her first and me last, as if I were an afterthought. They always complimented her beauty, her intellect, her potential, while I nodded politely nearby. I wondered sometimes if anyone would notice, if I simply disappeared from their conversations. The divide between us widened, until it felt like we lived in two different households under one roof. Madeline soared effortlessly, while I stayed grounded, carrying the weight of expectations I never agreed to. And through it all, I learned to survive on the quiet hope that someday someone would finally see me. Madeline entered adulthood the same way she moved through childhood, with doors opening before she even knocked. She graduated early, earned promotions quickly, and gathered applause everywhere she went. Dad bragged about her to anyone with ears, repeating her success like a rehearsed sermon. He spoke her name with pride so loud it filled every corner of the house. Whenever my name came up, it was usually followed by a sigh or a casual shrug. I tried working different jobs. Hopping one of them would feel like a fresh start. But every accomplishment I brought home was greeted with mild surprise or quiet dismissal. Dad often asked why I couldn't be more like her, as if our identities were interchangeable. He said effort was good, but results were better, and mine were never quite enough. I started wondering if trying harder only highlighted how far behind I already was. Madeline visited less often, but even her absence seemed to shine brighter than my presence. When she entered a room, the atmosphere shifted, lively and warm. When I walked in, things stayed exactly the same, as if I hadn't moved at all. Mom sometimes defended me, but her voice was thin compared to Dad's certainty. He spoke as though he understood me better than I understood myself. He said I lacked direction, ambition, and the natural gift my sister had. He didn't consider that what I lacked most was encouragement, not ability. I spent years pretending the insults didn't sink deep, but they did, every single time. Friends told me to ignore it, but they didn't grow up hearing they were second best. They didn't watch a sibling become a pedestal, while they became a comparison. In quiet moments, I wondered if lovability was measured by achievements, not by existence. The pressure grew heavier, as Madeline became a rising name in her field. Articles praised her brilliance, colleagues admired her drive, and family gatherings revolved around her victories. At those gatherings, I sat at the edge of conversations like a guest in my own story. Dad asked why I hadn't found a stable career yet, though I was trying every day. He said my choices lacked focus, ignoring the courage it took to keep searching. When I finally found a job I liked, he said it wasn't impressive enough to mention. Madeline congratulated me with a pat on the shoulder, the way adults praise a child. Her smile held sympathy, not pride, which somehow hurt more than Dad's criticism. I felt invisible, yet painfully exposed, as if my failures were highlighted for everyone to see. Every compliment she received echoed in my mind, as proof of how little I mattered. Even strangers compared us when they learned we were siblings, calling her remarkable and me quiet. Quiet became my defining trait, as though silence was the only thing I was good at. The more I tried to push forward, the more I felt the weight of years pulling me back. My self-worth became tangled with their expectations until I didn't know which thoughts were mine. I told myself to hold on, that things would change if I just worked harder. But deep down, doubt rooted itself and grew stronger with every passing year. I started to believe that maybe I truly was the weaker thread in a perfect tapestry. And yet, something inside me whispered that the story wasn't finished, not even close. I was cleaning the attic when I found it, a small wooden box tucked behind old trunks. Dust coated every surface, and cobwebs clung to the corners like forgotten memories. Inside, among faded photographs, I discovered a folded envelope, yellowed with age. It was addressed to me in Mom's handwriting, but she had never sent it. My hands trembled as I broke the seal, half afraid of what I might find. The first words made me stop breathing. "My dearest Evan, I hope you never see this the wrong way." She wrote about how much she loved me, though the world had never made it easy to show. She admitted feeling guilty for letting Dad's favoritism and Madeline's brilliance overshadow me. Mom confessed she had always seen my effort, my heart, and my quiet strength. She described nights lying awake, wondering if I felt unloved or invisible. She said I was never a burden, though years of silence suggested otherwise. Her words painted a picture of a mother who quietly fought for me in her own way. She explained that she had tried to intervene, but was often silenced by Dad. Mom wrote that she longed to tell me the truth, but didn't know how to break the pattern. She wanted me to know that the labels placed on me were not my reality. Every sentence cut through decades of doubt, slicing away layers of shame I had carried. She reminded me of my worth, independent of grades, awards, or anyone's approval. Her love for me had never faltered, even if it had been hidden under fear and exhaustion. Mom encouraged me to trust myself, to value my own voice and choices. She wrote about watching me struggle silently and wishing she could shield me from it. Her words described the Evan she had always believed in, not the one shaped by others' judgments. I could feel her presence in every line, a warm hand reaching across time. The letter admitted that she often envied Madeline's ease, but never doubted my potential. She asked me to forgive her for not speaking sooner, for not defending me openly. Mom said she had hoped that one day I would see myself as she did, capable, deserving, strong. The letter included small memories only we shared, moments that made me ache and smile. She mentioned my first school recital, the painting I gave her, the way I comforted her during hard days. Each memory reminded me that I had always mattered to someone who truly knew me. Her words were full of honesty, love, and a quiet bravery I had never recognized before. I read and reread the letter, feeling a mix of grief, relief, and newfound clarity. It was as if a door inside me had been unlocked, revealing a truth long buried. For the first time, I realized the story I had been told about myself was not the full story. The letter confirmed that I had value, that I was seen, that I was loved deeply. Tears ran down my face as I clutched the envelope, the weight of decades finally lifting. In that moment, I understood that everything I had believed about being second best was a lie. Mom had fought for me quietly, and her words became a lifeline I never knew I needed. The discovery of this unsent letter changed everything, giving me a courage I had never felt before. I folded it gently, knowing my life was about to shift in ways I could not yet imagine. Reading the letter, a storm of emotions hit me all at once, confusing and overwhelming. For years, I had accepted a false story about who I was, and now it crumbled. Every insult, every sigh, every shadow I felt in my own home flashed before my eyes. I realized I had been cast into a role I never agreed to, the invisible, inadequate sibling. Mom's words contradicted decades of rejection, offering a reality I had never allowed myself to see. She had believed in me, quietly and fiercely, while the world treated me as unworthy. The truth settled in my chest like a heavy, bright weight I didn't know how to carry. For the first time, I understood that I was not broken, weak, or unimportant. I sat on the attic floor, trembling, as the clarity sank deeper with every reread. Mom had been fighting for me in silence, her love persistent against a wall of indifference. I felt anger rise first, sharp and raw, for the years I had wasted believing their lies. Then came relief, as though a long-held breath I didn't know I was holding finally escaped. Memories of my childhood returned, tinged with a new perspective I couldn't ignore. All those times I thought I was failing were moments of unnoticed effort and quiet courage. The roles imposed on me were never a reflection of my true value, only someone else's control. I pictured Mom at night, awake and worried, silently hoping I would see my own worth. Her hope, though delayed, ignited a spark inside me I thought had died long ago. A wave of grief followed, mourning the lost years spent under a false shadow. I realized I had internalized their judgments, making them part of my identity. Now, I could separate the labels from the truth of who I really was. Mom's words became a mirror, reflecting the Evan I had always been, not the one they claimed. I began to see potential where I had only seen inadequacy. Her love felt like a shield, protecting me from the poison of past years. I could almost hear her voice, soft but unwavering, urging me to stand up and reclaim myself. The letter gave me permission to reject the narrative that had trapped me. I understood that self-worth had always been mine to claim, even if denied by others. Anger, sadness, and love mixed together, creating a strange clarity in my heart. I felt the urge to confront the past, not for revenge, but for acknowledgement. Everything I had believed about being less than was now questioned, slowly dismantled. The attic, once a place of forgotten things, became a sanctuary where truth finally emerged. I thought about the life ahead, no longer defined by comparisons or imposed roles. The letter had shifted the axis of my existence, giving me a lens to see myself clearly. For the first time in decades, I felt a kind of freedom, fragile but undeniable. I knew I could not go back to believing I was small, invisible, or unworthy. Mom's confession had ignited a fire of courage that would guide my next steps. The truth, finally revealed, demanded action, not silence. I folded the letter carefully, holding it as both proof and promise. In that moment, I knew everything was about to change, starting with me. I felt my heart swell with both sorrow and strength, ready to claim a life of my own. I realized the roles assigned to me, since childhood could no longer dictate who I would become. The attic, once dusty and dim, felt alive with the possibility of my new beginning. Mom's words were more than comfort. They were a blueprint for reclaiming my identity. And in that stillness, I knew I had found the first real truth of my life. I mattered. I held the letter tightly as I walked into the living room, ready to face them both. Dad was reading the newspaper, oblivious to the storm I was bringing into the house. Madeline sat on the couch, scrolling on her phone, completely unaware of my plan. I cleared my throat and laid the envelope on the coffee table, my hands steady. "I found this," I said, my voice calm but firm, "and it changes everything you told me." Dad looked up, confusion flickering in his eyes before it hardened into defensiveness. "Evan, what is this?" he asked, his voice sharp, masking the fear beneath. "I think you should read it," I said, pointing to the letter, "because it proves what I always suspected." Madeline glanced at me, her eyebrows raised, a small frown forming. "I don't understand," she said, picking up the envelope. "Why would Mom write this?" I met her gaze, holding nothing back. "Because she saw me. She always saw me, something you never did." Dad's jaw tightened, and he leaned back, trying to regain control of the room. He said, "Evan, this is private. Mom never meant for you to find this." I shook my head. "It doesn't matter. I needed to know the truth." Madeline's voice was quiet, almost defensive. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You don't," I replied, my voice rising slightly, "because you never bothered to look beyond yourself." The room grew tense, heavy with years of unspoken resentment and buried truths. I read aloud the parts where Mom expressed guilt, love, and belief in me. Her words cut through the years of criticism and neglect like a knife of light. Dad's face turned red with anger, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for the letter. "Evan, how dare you?" he shouted, but his voice lacked conviction, full of panic instead. Madeline set the envelope down slowly, her eyes wide, trying to mask the surprise she felt. "You've been living a lie," I said, "believing their story instead of the truth, but now I know." The room fell silent except for my steady breathing, each word echoing like a bell. Dad leaned forward, his voice low, trying to control the narrative. "You're twisting this. Mom didn't." "Stop," I interrupted, holding up my hand. "I don't need your version anymore. I have hers." Madeline's lips pressed into a thin line, a mix of frustration and unease flickering across her face. "You were always second," I said, "not because I am weak, but because you chose to make it so." I saw the cracks in their defenses, the way Dad's authority wavered for the first time in years. Madeline looked down, silent, and I realized she had never fully understood the harm caused. I stood taller, feeling the weight of years lifting, the truth finally mine to claim. "I am done being your shadow," I said, my voice steady, final, and resolute. Dad tried to argue, but his words fell flat, meaningless against the proof of Mom's love. Madeline opened her mouth but closed it again, unable to respond to the truth I held. I placed the letter back in the envelope, tucking it into my pocket like a shield and a key. "You will not define me anymore," I said, glancing at both of them one last time. The silence stretched, heavy but liberating, as I turned and walked toward the door. I could feel the past behind me, but it no longer held me captive. For the first time, I saw them clearly, controlling, defensive, incapable of seeing me as equal. I didn't need their validation anymore. I had Mom's truth and my own strength. The confrontation ended not with agreement, but with clarity, my path finally opening. I left the room with my head high, knowing I had faced them and reclaimed my voice. Their anger and denial could no longer chain me to a false identity. Every step away felt lighter, freer, a tangible release from decades of manipulation. I carried the letter as a reminder that love and truth could survive even the harshest neglect. And for the first time, I believed in myself without waiting for permission. I walked out of the house with the letter still in my pocket, each step lighter than the last. The weight of years, spent being small and unseen, finally lifted from my shoulders. I didn't look back, not once, though I could feel their eyes burning into my back. The streets felt wide and open, filled with possibilities I had never allowed myself to imagine. For the first time, I felt the freedom to breathe without permission or judgment. Every memory of neglect and comparison flashed through my mind, now distant and powerless. I realized that leaving didn't mean I hated them. It meant I loved myself enough to choose. I called a small apartment I had found weeks earlier my new home, my sanctuary. The walls were bare, but they promised a space where I could finally belong to myself. I unpacked slowly, savoring the act of arranging my life on my own terms. I placed the letter on a shelf where I could see it every day, a reminder of truth and love. Mom's words became a compass, guiding me through the uncertainty of my new life. I started seeking work that fulfilled me, not what anyone else deemed impressive. Every success, no matter how small, felt like a victory won for myself alone. I reconnected with friends I had neglected, choosing relationships that celebrated me. The voice of doubt still whispered occasionally, but it no longer dominated my thoughts. I learned to replace their criticisms with my own affirmations of worth and ability. Every morning, I read Mom's letter again, letting it strengthen the foundation of my self-esteem. I allowed myself to feel joy without guilt, to dream without fear of comparison. I explored hobbies and passions I had abandoned, rediscovering pieces of me long forgotten. Evenings were filled with quiet reflection, sometimes laughter, sometimes tears of release. I felt a growing confidence, the kind that comes from surviving a lifetime of being unseen. I realized I could set boundaries, saying no without fear of anger or rejection. My life began to take shape according to my values, not the scripts imposed by others. The past still existed, but it no longer dictated my choices or my sense of self. I started journaling, pouring my thoughts onto paper, clarifying my hopes and fears. Each word I wrote strengthened the person I was becoming, independent and whole. I allowed myself to celebrate small victories, knowing they were meaningful and deserved. The world felt bigger now, filled with people and opportunities I could engage with freely. I started volunteering at a local center, helping others while acknowledging my own resilience. Every act of kindness I gave became a reflection of the love I had finally embraced for myself. I realized that leaving was not an end, but the start of an authentic life I had longed for. I forgave myself for believing their story, knowing it had been years of conditioning, not truth. The letter had arrived late, but its timing was perfect for the rebirth I needed. I could finally hear my own voice, strong and unwavering, guiding my choices. Even when memories of home surfaced, they no longer triggered shame or self-doubt. I saw my worth in my actions, in my love, and in the life I was building from scratch. I began to make plans for the future, guided by hope, ambition, and clarity of purpose. For the first time, I felt fully responsible for my happiness and empowered to pursue it. The past was behind me, the letter in my pocket a talisman of truth and resilience. I knew I deserved love, respect, and joy, and I would claim them without hesitation. Each day I woke, I felt a little stronger, a little freer, and increasingly at peace with myself. Leaving wasn't just escape. It was the beginning of the life I had always deserved. And in that new life, I discovered the courage to finally live for me, not anyone else. The letter stayed with me, a constant reminder of love I had almost forgotten. It arrived late, but its message was stronger than any moment I had lived under their control. I realized I had spent decades doubting myself because others refused to see me. Now I knew my worth was not defined by comparison, neglect, or criticism. I carried that truth into every decision, every step, every choice I made. Leaving the house was more than escape. It was claiming a life that was always mine. I built a home filled with light, respect, and the freedom to be myself completely. The past no longer haunted me. It became a lesson in resilience and self-love. I forgave them quietly, not for them, but to release the hold they had on my heart. Mom's words were my anchor, proof that someone always believed in me unconditionally. I started to trust myself, to celebrate my achievements without guilt or apology. I learned to set boundaries, speak my truth, and protect my peace fiercely. Every day became an act of reclaiming the identity they tried to steal from me. I finally understood that love and validation must begin with oneself. The letter saved me from a life of self-doubt and invisible suffering. I knew now that I was enough, deserving, and capable of building my own happiness. And with that knowledge, I stepped fully into a life defined by freedom and truth. I am no longer their shadow, nor a silent observer of someone else's story. I am Evan, and I am worthy, loved, and unstoppable on my own path.